Welcome again to Adobe Summit and welcome to this automotive industry track. My name is Jan Borgward. I'm Principal Automotive and run DSG here in Central Europe. And I'm going to cover a topic that's really top of mind for many OEMs who work with Adobe at the moment. It's around how customer experience management at scale principles can help to free up significant cash flow. It's not just me talking about that. In the second half of that session, I'll be joined by former chairman of the board of Daimler AG, Dr. Dieter Zetsche, and we're going to have an interesting discussion around that as well. So let's jump right into that. It's all about the way software is shaping the industry. It's all around how customer experience is driving the necessity to change. And this is also leading into a new necessary mind shift for OEMs. All the things that need to be developed now are very familiar in other areas as well. So the digital business models are existing in channels and customer interfaces outside of the car. So engineers can learn from that, and we want to help them to bring those things together and scale that and be even more innovative as they have been in the past. And I think it's really important from the very beginning to think of economies of scale principles and not just use case-based innovation. The shift into that requires more speed, more flexibility, but also more free money. And this is something that can be considered in this area as well. We're going to come to this point. Let's start first with what's happening at the moment. We are in the middle of an era. It's a digital experience area. It's no future topic for OEMs anymore. Look at, for example, the newly launched MBUX screen in Mercedes-Benz cars, a 4-screen, high-resolution, highly interactive entertainment system. Wow. But it's not just Mercedes-Benz, for example. Look at the IM Motors Sedan that has been launched newly. When you look at the co-pilot space, it looks like my home entertainment system. When I get into the co-pilot seat, I feel like at home, and I instantly know how to run those systems because I'm familiar with that customer interface that is presented to me. But it's getting even more interesting. If you have seen the Shanghai introduction of the MG Cyberstar Roadster, that's a sports car, and when you get into that environment, if you get into the driver's seat, you have something in front of you that looks like a PlayStation controller. It's a entertainment-driven car experience, and I think you feel great when you sit in that car and have that kind of racing feeling you already know from your playing a PlayStation, for example. Wow, that's interesting. So the way cars are innovated at the moment are really going from a customer first perspective and see how they can also have a immersive experience with their car, and it's driven by software. So when you think of that, this transformation and how this mind shift needs to look at, it puts this idea of customer experience, the way customers perceive that interaction with their car, into the front. It changes from, let's say, from in the past, we had a market research from, 3 to 6 years, which led to a development for a car that has been then brought into the market, and then I'm done. That's not the case anymore. We now need to think of what is the ever-evolving customer preference. This changes every year, if not every month. Now, how can we set up a system that helps us to reflect on those increasing needs for innovation, to have a everlasting customer experience, no matter what happened in the market in the past years? And the digital development is super fast, but if you, on the other side, look, for example, on the way motors are lasting now, combustors versus EVs, the EVs hold much longer. So that means you need to have an environment that is in 10 years still as up to date as it is today when I buy that car. How do I do that? How can I have innovation that's everlasting? This is actually a question people ask themselves when they are in their buying cycle. Now with the new mobility services, they can decide between a long range of different options. It's not anymore about owning a car. It's about owning or leasing or having a mobility service, or you tell me. It's not a one customer journey anymore. It's a multifaceted way of doing business with those people, and they recognize that. Which means when they decide, they also look in that way of how flexible is that car with me, or how flexible is that mobility option with me? How innovative is that? How connected is that with my digital life? And this is something that is completely changing the way people now decide for mobility options. So we're getting away from that classic business model where it was all around purchasing that car. We had a one-off revenue for OEMs, and then as soon as interaction happened, for example, with maintenance stations or with car parts upsales and so forth, that was revenue often in other hands. And also when you sold that car, that revenue was gone for OEMs. That's a problem, and this is something we want to, of course, have to change. So if we now believe in the new way of doing business for OEMs, it's all around the way how I finance my options. It's very often even more about annual recurring revenue, or in other words, subscriptions, where the one-off car selling revenue is not as important anymore as it has been in the past. But new ways of monetizing the customer is getting into the front and center, which means how do I subscribe for new customer-based or segment-based services or applications, or how do I run upgrades and can make sure that I have flexible models for the functionalities of my car. For example, how can I, when it's winter, set up a heated steering wheel, and when it's getting warmer again outside, how can I make sure that I don't need to pay for that? It's existing already in the car. I just use my app or use my car and unlock that feature for a certain time frame. This kind of way to interact with customers is something that needs a great understanding of the customer, B, a very intuitive and flexible way to unlock these kind of features, and C, look, this is something where we learn about the customers as well, and this means we will interact with customers more and more intensely. We also need to rethink about the way we think of data. So that's something we need to consider. But I think overall it's important that this kind of option of monetizing customers will lead into new business models, and it will increase the customer lifetime value when we think of the way we monetize people over the time they use, own, or subscribe cars or mobility services. This is something that will increase a lot. So the way we believe this can be improved is really in the understanding of a customer, provide the next best offer for that, and unlock with a highly flexible way these kind of options. Additionally to that, I think it's important to recognize that if we have cars that will last over a decade, we need to ensure that the residual value of that car will be kept as high as possible. It's a second lever for OEMs today. When I have a car that has a motor that lasts for 10 years, and also I have a car that will have a very intuitive, up-to-date customer interface, then the value doesn't decrease a lot, even after 10 years of having that car in the market. A huge lever to increase the efficiency and the revenue, especially for markets like, I don't know, US, where around 90% of the cars are financed. And this is something we can improve as well. So what do we need to do? I think it's important to understand that platforms are the key for that. We already know platforms in the car environment. We know the chassis. We know, for example, the battery blocks where, I don't know, we can decide between 400 and 800 volt, depending on the make we're going to talk about. We have industrial design that is standardized a lot, and where this kind of platform approach help us to be as efficient as possible and as have a fast time to market as possible. Where we don't see that yet is the customer interface, where much of that is still manual work and still customized innovation for each of the cars that will be brought out. But if we look at that, I think this is really this is a huge lever to save cost. If we look at modern customer interfaces, all we need in a very simplistic way is basically the UX. That's what the customer sees. And below that UX, there's standardized software. We have a personalization engine. We have the applications that run on that environment. We have ID services and profiles that are necessary to have that meaningful interaction. We have, of course, car-related data like telemetrics, and everything needs to be set up in a flexible cloud infrastructure to be as scalable and as innovative as possible. If you look at that, this is no different to what we already have in your digital marketing, in your web experience, in your digital communication, in your mobile applications. Now, why don't we scale that into the car too? You have exactly the same necessary capabilities for that environment. And if you think about that, the savings you can have with that are tremendous. It's if you just look at one make, the way you can reduce the cost, it's multifaceted. It's around if you don't build that software on your own, it's around how you can save money in the licenses. It's all about the implementation and the upgrading cost, especially implementation and integration is one of the biggest drivers for cost. It's up to 50% of the whole infrastructure now. If we can reduce that one, that makes really tremendous amount of money. Maintenance and training costs, operations costs, IT infrastructure costs, vendor management costs, all those different levers come into play when we think of a consistent platform. Now, think of that. If you look at different makes, different models, different brands, different markets, every one of them today have a very customized environment. Every one of them have their UX. And then they run components below that UX that enable that experience. And those components, if you look across the different variations, markets, brands, makes, and so forth, this is something that is very similar. The capabilities they build into cars are very, very comparable. And below that, we have a digital experience platform that enable that meaningful interaction with customers. That is the data foundation, that is the integration, that is the way we come up with an express offer and communicate that. This is everything that is already existing, but everyone is doing that on their own. And there's so much we can reduce. We can reduce that customization to the UX. Still, we want to ensure that the differentiation of a brand, of a model is existing. But if you think of that, it's really something that's just the way the customer perceives it. And that is only the UX. The capabilities I need below that are still the same. I still think about the same components. I still think about this platform below that to enable the components to have a compelling customer experience management. So, and this is something that can be standardized across models, markets, brands, and so forth. So, and this is something talking about integrations also that needs to be connected to more things. If we think of integration costs as a number one cost driver, then think of all the things that need to be connected to that as a customer experience related software from OEMs too. Your apps, your intelligent cockpit, digital business models, mobility services, and so forth. There are more that are not connected to customer experience management. Software that's necessary for automated driving or vehicle motion and energy and so forth. But many of them have a relationship with the way people interact and perceive your car. And this is that needs to be integrated where capabilities need to be shared between those different applications. And this is where scalability can also help us to reduce the cost of integration. Now, this is how we will save a lot of money. It will be a 8 to 9 digit savings opportunities, especially for the big OEMs, if you go for a standardized way. This is really something that helps a tremendous amount of money, which will support their transformation programs at the moment to be financed. To conclude on that, it's again, we have a digital customer experience. It is a battleground. It will be decided on the way people perceive your car, and software is driving that. Think of digital business models, how they have evolved in your car, but also outside of that environment. And what can we learn between each of those things? And how can we integrate with customer interfaces that are already existing, but have a connected experience for your customers? So we need to bring them together to have that one voice to your customer. So this is something that will help us to scale, especially when we reduce the customization as much as possible and use standards within your infrastructure and software setup as much as possible. Now, let's see as the next part of our session here, how Dieter Zetsche will see that. And I'm more than happy now to welcome Dr. Dieter Zetsche to the session. I'm looking forward to that conversation. So, Dr. Zetsche, thanks for being with us here at Adobe Summit. I'm super glad you made it and we can have the chat together. It's all about the idea of customer experience in automotive areas, especially within the car. But I guess few people of us need an introduction of you. You're very famous in that industry, but I think everyone would be interested after you resigned from being a board member of Daimler AG. What has happened in those past 3 years? What's driving you today?
Well, thanks for the question. I have a pretty full basket. Of course, I try to spend more time with my family, not too successfully, but to some extent. Other than that, I'm having some traditional jobs like chairman or board members in mature companies. Beyond that, I'm advisor to some companies like Adobe. And very important for me are quite a number of engagements in startups where I'm kind of business angel, typically invested, and helping them getting their business set up. And last but not least, I'm pretty active in a large NGO which tries to preserve the African ecosystem. That's about the scope of different activities I'm engaged in.
Well, that's a lot. It's a long day for you, I guess.
That's mostly true, yes.
Cool. I would be interested when we talk about Adobe and Adobe Summit. I think the day is all around great customer experiences, and I would be interested in your perspective. When you think of a car or the environment we have as an OEM, how does customer experience and how does it increase in importance over the time? Where do you see the points of interest for that?
Well, we talk about the car sometimes as the third place. You spend a lot of time at home, hopefully, more so now. You spend quite some time in the office, and you spend time in the car. And what's important that these transitions are absolutely seamless. So you're in several ecosystems and you want to stay within your ecosystem when you move from one location to the other one, including to the car. At the same time, of course, in the car, you expect to have a specific ecosystem which benefits from all the data gathered in the car and from the environment you're moving through, navigation, whatever it is. And to provide that environment for the customer in a car is the task of the OEM. Of course, at the same time, the customer relationship as far as sales, the whole sales channel is concerned, is very important as well. In all these areas, you want to be cutting edge and you want to be independent of the big ecosystems, even though you connect with them, but not be driven by them.
Yeah, that's interesting. So if you think of a car being the third place, as you just stated, and the transition many OEMs just go through from combustors to EVs, one of the claims is that EVs last much longer, which means that the place, your third place you're in, may be outdated at a certain point of time. So from my perspective, this is something we should now look in. So if that's an environment which is not connected anymore to my home, which is not connected anymore to my other environments, I have a bad experience. So actually, I want to make sure that the customer interface or my customer interaction is something that's ever innovative, if you will.
Well, first of all, I would challenge your hypothesis. When I'm sitting my 61 300 SL, I don't know, certainly I won't sit in the 60-year-old electric car. Others might, we'll see. But in any case, of course, you're right. The innovation cycle of a car is like 6 years, for instance. In the digital world, it's like a minute or a second. So you're constantly innovating. And what this, on the one hand, on the hardware side, you have to provide for space and speed into the future in the car. But on the software side, you have to be able to download just like on your iPhone into the car, not only data, but new systems like apps as well. So you have to update your internet, your digital connection or digital environment within the car, independent of the age of the car itself. And that's a major requirement to really stay relevant in a car after you bought it.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And I guess it would also increase the digital value of after a certain period, people want to exchange the cars, and that's important for OEMs. But I guess it has an implication, what you just said is you want to upload applications which enable new functionalities into the cars, which is a major piece of strategic areas at OEMs, where you think of new business models, where you think of new ways to have a customer relationship, but also to monetize your traditional, or get over your traditional way to monetize a customer relationship and find new ways to have that meaningful customer lifetime value for both sides, right? It's not just the customer, it's also an interest of OEMs to keep this up to date. If you think of those business models, is there any big bet you would say this is the most important part, or is it spread across multiple of those new business models? What's your perspective on that?
Of course, every car manufacturer is on the search for the holy grail in this regard. Probably there's not a single one. Certainly, on the one hand, you can offer new services into the car based on subscription models. You can download against payment new functionalities of your car. You can make use of the data your car collects, which at least you have to be a little bit careful, because the ownership of this data is challenged. Is the OEM the owner of the data? Is the customer the owner of the car the owner of the data? Or has everybody to have access to this data, but still following the privacy policy? So there are a number of areas which are not totally clarified yet. But in any case, everybody is convinced that there's tremendous opportunity. There are very simple things like you get the information at what station you get cheaper fuel for your car, for instance. But there are more meaningful informations, especially around the electric car, of course, which are related to the car, but independent of a car. Again, if you see that just as a third place, you can think of all kinds of services being rendered to the customer, some of them against payments. And now you have to understand what the customer is really interested in and what he's willing to pay for, and in what form, and one time or subscription model, all of these questions. And I think everybody is checking and testing and trying to understand, but nobody knows the answer by today.
No, sure. It's a lot about testing and understanding and getting the data that's helping us to get to this understanding, to know what the customer, who he is or she, and what's the preference of those connections.
I mean, that's key. At the end, even though you want to open up new revenue sources for your company, it's most important that ultimately the customer has the sensation that he gets additional value, and not that he's bothered by whatever things he's not really interested in.
Yeah, absolutely. And when I look at those digital environments, I mean, we know that from many of our customers, but also, of course, from the automotive space. I think having this kind of connection is still it's a hurdle for them to overcome, especially from an organizational perspective. And I see some comparisons when you think of economies of scale, where, for example, the chassis or now the battery blocks, for example, are scaled across different models and even brands. I think we're going into the same direction for this customer interface, but this has implications on the organization, which are yet to be solved. I guess that's one of the biggest hurdles as well, breaking down the silos, making sure everyone is going into the same direction, connecting all the touch points. So what's your view on that? Is that something we can solve?
I mean, of course, on the technical side is paramount that you have one data point for the customer where everything is connected and collected. Whatever interaction between the car and the customer, or between the company and the customer are happening, all of that has to be linked to the same source and the same one single information link with the customer. That is paramount. But then, of course, to some extent, in order to be able to do so, you have to reflect that in the organization as well. And there's always some conflict. You can say, well, I have someone who is responsible for digital throughout the company, whatever it counts. But then perhaps the business units might, the development, the car, and everybody might think, okay, let this guy or this girl do what she wants, I do what I want. So you have to have the interrelation, and that's why you need modern forms of organizations where you really don't work that much hierarchically, you don't work that much in functions, but you really work around customer connections, relations, involving everybody in the company who is needed. That's easier said than done, but with a strict static organization, you hardly will be able to address that need in a successful way.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I think it's a great topic. I think it's driving us every day, and I think there's more to come. There are problems we can solve, but it's everyone needs to go into the same direction, and this is what drives me personally as well. So I would like to thank you. I think it was a great conversation, and I would say big thanks to you, and great to have you here with us at Adobe Summit, and thanks for making the time.
You're most welcome, and thank you very much for having me.
Absolutely.